This video lesson will introduce you to the concept of percent yield. Percent yield is essentially a way to measure how well you've done in a chemical reaction. It compares the amount of product you expected to produce to the amount of product that you actually did produce in lab. For this video lesson, you will need your Unit 3 notes packet, open to page 2, your yellow objective packet, and something to write with. This lesson will cover Learning Objective 10.0, calculate the percent yield of a process given the experiment results. Calculating percent yield is a lot like calculating your score on a test. The percent yield is the actual yield, or the amount of product you actually produced in lab, divided by the theoretical yield, multiplied by 100. This isn't very different than calculating your percentage on the test. To calculate your percentage on a test, you would take the actual yield of points you earned, divide by the maximum, or the theoretical yield of points that you could earn, and multiply that by 100 to get a percentage. When you're working percent yield problems, remember that the actual yield will be the amount produced in lab. If you're working in the lab, this is the amount that you actually managed to produce, and if you're working problems out of a textbook, this number would have to be given to you in the problem. The theoretical yield is the amount of product you expected to get. It's predicted by stoichiometry, and this is a number that you're likely going to have to calculate using your grams to moles to moles to grams stoichiometry procedure. Let's look at an example of a percent yield problem based upon your basic stoichiometry practice problem number 3, part A. If you've completed this problem, you should have found out that if you reacted 20 grams of C7H6O3 to produce aspirin, which is C9H8O4, you should have come up with an answer that you should have been able to produce 26.1 grams of aspirin. If you haven't worked this problem yet, stop now, complete this problem, and then resume this video lesson. Now that we have an answer to basic stoichiometry practice problem 3A, let's go one step further and calculate the percent yield. If this procedure in lab actually produces 23.8 grams of aspirin, we can calculate our percent yield. So our problem here is to find the percent yield. We know that the actual yield is 23.8 grams because that was the amount that we were given in the problem as being the amount that we produced in lab. And our theoretical yield is something that we calculated through stoichiometry, and that came from the original stoichiometry problem that we completed when we were doing the basic stoichiometry practice problems. And that's where we get the 26.1 grams. Our planar equation here is going to be to use our percent yield equation. Percent yield is actual yield divided by theoretical yield over 100. If we plug all the parts and pieces in, we do the math, and keep 3 significant figures, we find out that this process went pretty well. We got a 91.2% yield when we completed the process in lab. Now go to the your turn problems. There are 2% yield problems to complete here. Based upon what you've learned in the video lesson, complete these 2% yield problems. The answers to these 2 problems are on the back of the sheet to help you check yourself and make sure that you've learned what you needed to learn from this video lesson.